The Winnipeg Jets top line ate their Wheaties tonight, snorted a can of Monster, and little bro the Chicago Blackhawks so badly.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. More than anything, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, there's a good bit to talk about. The Jets just came off of opening up a can of whoop butt against the Chicago Blackhawks. You'll see Chicago scored a couple of goals. Wouldn't really think too much of it. This was a game where the Jets pretty much from front to back controlled the whole game. And, you know, the goals that Chicago got were either a little bit greasy and a little bit lucky, or in one instance, just a jaw-dropping individual effort from a guy like Andrei Burakovsky. But otherwise, the Jets were fantastic for this game. This was a win that I think the team really kind of needed just to remind themselves that, like, not every one of these games has to be some razor-thin margin. Sometimes it's just nice to beat up on an opponent and remind yourself of how good you can be. And in particular, the Jets' top line went absolutely ham. Now, it did come at a mild cost. Gus Nyquist is now injured, and he went out with some sort of lower body thing. I want to chat about that later and, you know, what the Jets are going to do because, yes, they're getting healthier, but they also don't want to have to deal with, you know, more injuries on top of what they already have when, you know, they're a little thin on depth and some of the kids haven't exactly staked an elite claim to a spot. Also want to chat about, you know, the Moose winning a couple of games finally. Are they back? Should we believe in this winning streak? Or is this just, you know, delaying the inevitable? We'll talk about that in just a brief moment. But before we do, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, Jets-Hawks, 6-3 win, big victory. I think the big storyline of this game was that, you know, the Jets just in general, you know, from top to bottom, really did not give the Hawks much to work with. Chicago has had a much improved season this year. Are they a good team? Well, you know, I don't know that anyone's going to sit there and say that necessarily, but this was, by all of their standards, you know, a solid effort. This was a better game from them. Still not quite where they want to be, I don't think. You know, at the end of the day, the Hawks are kind of still in that rebuilding process. But, like, you know, compared to the Hawks of old, where they just got embarrassed in every single capacity, every single effort, this was, you know, this has not been a season where that's been the case. Until tonight, though. You know, tonight's game, the Jets just kind of ripped them apart. And specifically, the Jets' top line really, really embarrassed Chicago. Now, we know that, you know, Scheifele, Connor Velarde, they've all been heating up to start the season. We know that, you know, having watched a good bit of what Scheifele and Connor have done on their own together, it's been really impressive. But tonight, man, they just Harlem Globetrotted the opponents. Chicago really had no answer. Scheifele had a goal and a couple of assists. Connor had a late goal that was an absolute roof job beauty. Velarde had his first multi-goal game of the season. Looked like he felt very happy. You know, Morrissey actually got on the score sheet as well. He's been getting a fair few assists, but now he actually had a goal and an assist. And then you also got some peripheral points from guys like Taves, Nemesnikov, Niederreiter, Nyquist also getting an assist. So it was just a really nice top-level performance from a lot of this team's top players. And it's the kind of stuff that I think has defined the Jets to start the season. When so many guys are out, you know, a lot of the biggest players on this team have had to pull double duty. And for the most part, you're really seeing that reflected in a lot of these games. But it's usually been much closer margins than this. You know, the Jets have had to really scrape by in a lot of these wins. Tonight wasn't that. The Jets just, from top to bottom, pretty much kind of showed the Hawks that, you know, you are the little bros in the division. You're not there yet. And even beat up as the Jets are, they still have the talent to take a team like this to task, which is great to see. You know, against Calgary and a few other teams, Minnesota, who just lost to the Penguins, I believe, you know, the Jets haven't always had it easy against those teams. They've pushed them. And, it had to come to Hellebuyck and some individual efforts really pulling through some big wins out of those games. This one, though, comfortable from front to back. The Hawks maybe had a couple of chances here and there, but really for the most part, it was all pretty much Winnipeg. Spencer Knight at the other end in goal looked pretty shaky. Hellebuyck didn't have to face a ton tonight. I thought he was generally pretty good, though. The goals against, there was nothing he could really do. The Teravainen one was just a really unlucky bounce. The Vlasic one was just kind of weird. I don't know where Vlasic was even coming from, but he was on the doorstep for some reason, so it was a bit of a tap-in for him. And then the Burakovsky goal would have been the most impressive goal in the night. Probably still is, if we're being 100% honest. But I'm going to be the homer and say, Connors was better, just because we have to. We have to up the Jets on this show. But yeah, other than a couple of individual moments or efforts, Winnipeg really just didn't have too much to worry about. This was, I would say, one of the more comfortable wins of the season so far. And I think for the Jets, it's exactly what you want them to go through. For as many games as Winnipeg has had to sweat its balls off to come through with like a close, 3-2 or 4-2 win, which may not sound that close on paper, but when you've seen how they've had to do it, you understand what I'm saying. It's just nice. You have a nice game. You beat the tar out of somebody. You have a very clean outing for the most part. Your top line goes absolutely ballistic, and you get Velarde a couple of goals after he's been dry for a good chunk of the start of the season. It's just a nice feeling, and I think it sets up a nice coming weekend game here where we've got the Penguins. And the Penguins, don't look now, but they've been like one of the top teams in the East. They're going to be a legitimately very difficult opponent. And to really start off this November, coming into a game like this where you've got an 8-3 record now, that's going to feel pretty nice. The Penguins have been, they've been impressive. They're 8-2 themselves. So, this game is kind of like a little bit of the calm before the storm. We'll see how Winnipeg handles it. But, this is just a nice evening, for a pre-Halloween game, a very fun outing. Taves even recording a point against his old team. It's just the sort of thing that I think this team kind of needed. We've had so many games, the past couple of weeks where Winnipeg was really holding on by the skin of its teeth, just waiting for everyone to get healthy, absolutely just surviving as much as possible, just surviving. And because of individual efforts from some of their top players, they've managed to do that. Hellebuyck has probably earned the Vezina and Hart Trophy in the span of like a month. Scheifele wants Team Canada badly. Kyle Connor wants Team USA. There's not really been any conversation about him going because his Four Nations tournament was a little underwhelming, but like Connor has been kind of ripping it up. And, it wouldn't shock me to see him on Team USA's roster here, especially because like for as much talent as Team USA has, there aren't that many American top level one-on-one matchup guys like Connor who have the release that he does that can skate the way he does and control play. So he might get a real nod. Morrissey, is really making his Team Canada case, continuing to just be such a dominant force on the back end. DeMello having his rebound season, Hellebuyck being Hellebuyck as always. A really nice start to the year for a lot of this team's biggest guns, which is crucial because a lot of the depth hasn't been able to convert as many opportunities and points. And speaking of the depth, it has taken a little bit of a hit again. We actually had a couple of injuries this game, but, the one that Luke Shen, he actually came back out later in the game. But Gus Nyquist was done as soon as it happened. And based on the footage, it didn't look good. We'll talk about, what the Jets can do here, who might come in for Nyquist, and, as the team gets healthier, ultimately what this all means, coming right up in just a brief moment. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score to the next fourth quarter comeback. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. If you think you know who's going to hit the next three or who's going to have one of the most impressive historical nights of the evening, this is your chance to turn your deep basketball knowledge into big wins. And maybe you're thinking about the longer term. Well, no matter what, if you're a brand new customer, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel. the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about, the Jets continuing to be tested a little bit injury-wise. Winnipeg's health has been all over the place to start the season. Not much you can do about it, to be honest. It just is what it is. Some fluky stuff, some really unfortunate stuff. And tonight, unfortunately, the Jets had another injury to a guy who honestly was starting to do pretty well. I think he was really starting to find his footing. Gus Nyquist, he hasn't exactly scored much of anything in terms of goals, but I feel like in a bottom six role, he's been noticeably positive in some ways. Unfortunately, tonight he had a pretty early injury that sidelined him and then just took him out of the game. Gus apparently twisted his knee or something. Really, really, really unfortunate. It ended up limiting him to just 3 shifts. He was down the tunnel and never came back. And for a guy like Nyquist, at this stage of his career, I just don't, know what an injury like this is going to happen or mean for his career. I really hope it's nothing too serious and it's just a bit of a tweaked, maybe knee or something. But at 36, any kind of injury like this is always a little bit worrying. So we'll wait to see, what the Jets say about the testing. For a guy who I thought was finally starting to feel, some real confidence and start to connect a little bit more on the score sheet, it really is a shame. He took a face-off, and apparently that's when he twisted his knee. So, that's just not something you ever want to see happen. Even for guys who are, struggling and maybe not having the best outing, you always hope that they stay healthy, that they're always feeling good. And so it sucks, man. It really does. Goose, I think, was starting to really fit into this Niederreiter, Nemesnikov, Nyquist line. And obviously they've kind of split that up a little bit for the past game or two to put, some guys in different spots, especially with Barron now kind of getting the third line promotion. But yeah, just a real downer in some ways. And it was really the only blemish on what was a pretty fun night for the Jets. In terms of now what that means, obviously you're going to have to look at some wing support. And Nyquist was, kind of in a forechecking role, I would say a grindy role. If you're looking at who from, the benches could fit in, I guess it's Chibrikov. For me, though, I want to see Lambert with Taves. I know Brad's not been very good to start the season in this couple of games. I don't know if it's just him or if he was also not feeling 100%. He has been dealing with illness recently. I think he's gotten over it from what I understand. Seems like he's just been healthy scratched, and maybe this is a chance to see if he can bring a burst of speed to your top 6. He's had moments where I thought he looked interesting in front of goal. Hasn't, necessarily connected much. And I think a lot of the D-zone work and stuff, it does leave some things to be desired, to put it very mildly. But when you're kind of in this situation and you don't have a lot of options, Chibrikov wasn't really noticeable either. The only thing that I remembered from his, games, other than some solid transition play, was that he took a couple of penalties, and they weren't good ones. So for me, I guess Lambert makes the most sense. I don't really know who else would, really get the nod here. You've already got Ford in, so you're not going to have him come in. Lowry could potentially come in this weekend, but I think that they're trying to not necessarily rush him back. They were asked about when Adam might return, and I kind of feel like they're hinting to next week is more likely. There's been off and on conversation about him maybe playing a game with the Moose or two just to get up to speed again. That doesn't seem to be imminent if it's happening. I don't even know how all of those rules work with respect to some injuries. You have an eligibility period, depending on your status, and maybe he could go through that. But I don't think that that's the plan. That does not seem to be what they're going with here, getting him off of LTIR back into practice. I would imagine that they just want to put him in a game or two next week, get him up to speed a little bit, and then go from there and see how he's feeling. So all that said, you still have to find some wing support. And so I would kind of look at a guy like Lambert. If Chibrikov comes in, it'll probably be fine. Chibi is kind of that forechecking, grindy wall offensive guy, which kind of matches the profile of what you were getting a little bit from Nyquist. But I think this also just speaks to the fact that the Jets have really had to, scrape and scrap for every single injury that they've dealt with, especially to start the season. It's all the relatively solid impact players and just guys that they don't really have easy replacements for. Nyquist was brought in to be the Ehlers replacement, which we knew he wasn't going to be. But even, with that in mind, he was still chipping in some really solid production and, wall battle stuff and some solid offensive zone production, a couple of nice assists on the power play. So his presence is going to be missed. And for the Jets, I guess you're going to have to just keep leaning on the kids. It's been a real rocky road to start the season with the injury stuff. And it's not even because the team is dealing with injuries to their older veterans that they just signed. It's a lot of the existing guys that you've already had. You had Lowry and Sandberg and some of your core guys go down. It's just, it's been a bit of a mess to start the season. So, at this point, if I have to donate a leg or two to somebody, I guess I will. It feels like it's just been a little bit cursed in that respect. But the good news is that despite all this, the Jets are still 8-3. I mean, if you'd have told me that was the record after the stretch of injuries that they've had, I wouldn't have even blinked. I would have just taken it, run with it, said, yeah, that's great. You don't have to tell me the details. Probably would not have wanted to know about how bad the defense has been at times. But again, you just take it and run. It's fine. You're going to get healthier. Your 5v5 game will start to look a little bit normal later. It's just, it is one of the situations, right? You take the points, you run, it's all good. But as far as, anything else is concerned, hope the kids do well. I think that's the biggest thing is it's also a little hard for players like Lambert and Shiberkov to play maybe 9-10 minutes in a bottom six role and really impress. Sometimes I think there are interesting expectations of the kids, and not that I disagree that they haven't done anything to really earn those spots yet, but I just feel like maybe there's less patience for them, and we've seen a lot of patience for other guys who maybe should have had some other action with respect to their ice time taken. And you probably know the guys I'm thinking about, the sorts of players that I'm considering in this conversation. I just think, you got to give them a few more games more consistently. If it really doesn't work, especially right now when, you're trying to figure something out and your injuries are piling up, it is what it is. Then send them back down and, just hope that the guys who come in a few weeks really fix the team. But, this is your evaluation period. This is what you have to see, what you've got in this pool. You've drafted pretty well for where you're picking. You've gotten a lot of really solid middle and late round talents, but, how many of them project to be impact NHLers? How many of them are really going to support your core going forward? And who might make more sense on the trade market to go somewhere and become, a piece that comes back to you to help you in the immediate present? That's a pretty solid question. I think the Jets are going to have to answer that one a little sooner than later, because this kind of feels like a year where you want to try and push. The Central Division probably has a couple of your strongest teams. We all know the Metro tends to be fake every year, so I'm not too worried about that. I really look at a team like Colorado and Utah and some of those squads right now as early front runners. And if the Jets can find a way to get past one of these teams in the playoffs, or whoever they might face, whether it's a Dallas or another squad in a handful of months, you might have a real shot at going deeper and finding your way into some better straights. So this is your chance to figure out if any of those kids are going to be part of that team, or if they are better off being moved to bring in other players that are new to the organization and are willing to contribute right now. So lots to think about. Despite the injury stuff, there are a couple of positives. Outside of the record, I think the biggest thing is just this experimentation, some of the new line combinations. We've just seen different looks, which we've never seen before. So as long as they keep doing it and trying to find some interesting combinations, I'm cool with that. I'd really like to see Colin Miller get some game time at some point, please, partly for my own sanity, probably partly for the sanity of all watching. But, hey, we're off to the weekend. It is the night before Halloween. The Jets have won. They're 8-3. Things are feeling pretty good. How else are, the Jets doing in the Baby Jet squad, right? Are the Moose doing okay? Because, haven't checked in on them too recently. You heard me say that they won a couple of games, and yeah, they've finally looked a little more productive recently, but I don't know if I'm entirely convinced about what we've seen. We'll chat about that and where this team is going in just a brief moment. Let's be honest, most of us can't name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch helps you organize your accounts, track your spending, and get a better handle on your investments, especially if you have a fairly large profile and portfolio. If you're trying to figure out what the trends are for some of your investments and whether you need to make some changes or try and just stay steady with what you've got, Monarch can help you with that, and you don't even have to touch a spreadsheet. You've got data visualizations, you can set goals, and if you've got a partner or spouse, you can even have a shared account so you'll always be on the same financial page. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're just wrapping up real quick here with some thoughts on the Manitoba Moose recently winning a couple of games. Obviously, that's nice, and winning games is great, especially when you're the Moose and you've, quite frankly, stumbled out of the gates. I think the bigger question for me is how much I really believe in it. And, you know, they beat up Tucson in a couple of games, and it wasn't quite beating up. You know, the score lines were a little closer. One of the Moose guys, Dewar, even missed an open net, Patrick Stefan style. He skated in and just sailed it over the net, which I don't know that I've ever really seen before. So I just, with Manitoba this year, I think a couple of things have really stood out with the way that they've played. You know, for one thing, they don't pressure opposing skaters that well. They sort of back off and allow too much space, which tends to be a stylistic choice. It's not usually something where you just see players necessarily making this call. This is, especially when it's team-wide, there tends to be a more coaching-related decision as to why they'd be doing that. And so that I don't find appealing. And I've also found, you know, the chaos and sort of lack of communication at times to be very frustrating. I've talked about this a lot recently with how the Moose have played, especially in their losses, and it just doesn't seem like a lot of the guys are on the same page. Now, with, you know, obviously they have a lot of new guys, they have a lot of young talent, and sometimes young, new talent can be a problem for a coach, especially when the team is disorganized and struggling to, you know, kind of find a level of consistency. But I think for the Moose, with how much veteran talent they also brought in, I don't know that I really buy this excuse. So at some point, this team is just going to have to start really putting it together, and we'll see if they kind of figure things out here. They're not too far back in the standings to start. I mean, they're fourth in the Central, which is not terrible, but it's also not great. A lot of the teams that they're chasing have already played, you know, just a couple of games less than the Moose have. So Manitoba's record, once everyone kind of catches up, probably won't look fantastic. I will say, you know, Grand Rapids obviously has been pretty good. They've started out the season perfect, and so, you know, not super shocked that Manitoba struggled against them. You know, the Moose also got kind of beat up by Laval in some of the later games in that series. So it's just it's one of those things. It's still early in the season, but I think Manitoba, for me, they're going to be a middle of the pack team unless, you know, the coaching staff starts to really get a handle on this roster. And if Morrison can't get better results out of this team, you know, a lot of me really hates to say this, but you've got to make a change, right? Like, the coaching staff was specifically given this roster to try and stop kids from stalling their development in the AHL. Now, I have my own qualms about the AHL being used as a development league, but it still is considered this for a lot of teams. And the Moose specifically have been so bad to where you'd actually be worried about sending the kids down there. They just lost so many games. They've been a very depressing, disorganized watch in many of their previous seasons. And so, you know, especially after last year, You just have to get more out of this roster. This team is too talented, and there's too much at stake for a lot of what Winnipeg needs these kids to do to have Manitoba stalling them out and looking like a disorganized mess. And I know that, like, in terms of AHL franchises, a lot of teams don't usually have successful ones when the parent club is doing really well. But I think for the Jets, with the amount that they've invested this offseason and what they've done to try and get this team back on track, you just need more. 3 wins out of 8 opportunities in your first 8 games, it's just not good enough. Manitoba's really got to pull it together. They're going to have to start playing some better hockey. And really, you just want to see the kids thrive. Colby Barlow hasn't really looked that impressive to start the season. He's really not been able to find much at all. Salamonson really has struggled to get a hold of, some of his line mates. We know that Salamonson's amazingly smart, and when he played in camp, he looked extremely confident. So I know it's not him. And if there's a point of happiness, I guess, Braden Yeager continues to collect points and look like he's very comfortable at the pro level. I start to wonder how long he'll actually need with Manitoba. Obviously you don't want to rush players, but Yeager might be one of those kids where he acclimates fast enough to this level of hockey that you start to think about what he can do here in the closer future. Obviously, again, you're not trying to rush. You don't want it to be a situation where you put him in a position to fail. But Yeager has been good enough to start on a really rough team to where, as we go through the season, if he looks like he's just too good for this level of hockey, could you find out if he's an internal upgrade for your team? The Jets have been dying for a 2C somewhere, and that's too much to ask of him, I think, as a young rookie in his first pro season. But just keep an eye out. If he keeps doing well and somebody gets hurt again, maybe he gets a look in the call-up. I don't know. It's an interesting situation to have, a good problem to have, and hopefully he continues to deliver results and points and gets more acclimated to this level. But in terms of the Jets weekend tomorrow, we'll talk about their game against Pittsburgh and what to expect from that. Going to be a very interesting one because Pittsburgh is playing some real high-event, high-tempo hockey. So exciting times. Should be a fun weekend, especially after the Halloween holiday. Have a fun evening tomorrow. We'll catch you then. But for now, that's all the time that we've got tonight. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great night. See you tomorrow. Go Jets, go.